Okay, we'll give it one more minute, and then we'll get going. Thanks again for coming, everyone. Let's give it another minute. Can everyone hear me all right? All right, thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Shannon Egan, for typing. All right, well, let's get going. So welcome, everyone. This is the first of Faces and Voices' new Third Thursday webinars. This is a new project from Faces and Voices of Recovery. We have decided to, once a month, put on an informational webinar for those of us in the greater recovery community, in the organized recovery community, to not just focus from an organizational standpoint on what type of work Faces and Voices in Recovery is doing, but also to just give information to people that are in recovery that might help us sort of advance the cause of recovery. One of those basic things that is, as you all know, super important today is social media. And everyone sort of knows social media. We're living in that age, but there are certain tips and tricks that will allow the recovery community as a whole to sort of gain a more cohesive presence in the world as it concerns to social media. As you all know, Faces and Voices of Recovery is dedicated to organizing and mobilizing the over 23 million Americans in recovery from addiction to alcohol and other drugs. Our families, our friends and allies in the recovery community and community organizations, and we want to promote the right and resources to recover. We do that through advocacy, education, and demonstrating the power and proof of long-term recovery. These are the types of trainings we do. We also administer an association of recovery community organizations. We created the Recovery Bill of Rights. We've created the recovery messaging training. And we have many other documents and things we do, a guide to mutual aid resources. Please check out our website at facesandvoicesofrecovery.org. It's in the web links in the bottom left. Next month's Recovery Third Thursday is going to be on the Recovery Voices Count toolkit and campaign that we're getting ready to launch. Again, this is an ongoing project of Faces and Voices. We put it on in each election year. And the Recovery Voices Count toolkit will be especially useful after you've gotten the social media training and learn how to put on a sort of recovery-oriented voter registration drives, get out the vote campaigns, different ways of interacting with candidates, and just guide to the overall political process and civic engagement and voter education for those of us in the recovery community, and most importantly, your friends, allies, and family. Because if it's just us, it's not going to work. Faces and Voices is really dedicated to the idea of not only mobilizing those people in recovery, but everyone around us, because that's the only way it's going to work. So enough of me droning on about us. I'm going to turn it over to Shannon Egan, who has graciously given us her time today to talk about social media for those in the recovery community. Shannon?
Yeah, thank you, Laszlo. Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm going to move the speaker a little closer to me. So I'm very excited to be here. I would love to just kind of ask a quick question, and if you don't mind typing in so I can see it. I'm not sure how good everybody's sound is, but I would love to know one thing that you would like to get out of this training, or why you're here and what brought you here, and I'll kind of take that into consideration as I see your responses pop up on my screen. I'm very passionate about social media. I love social media. I use it for my own branding. I'm going to just kind of tell you a little bit about my experience and how I came to become like involved with social media and helping Faces and Voices, and also USERA, which is a recovery community organization in Utah where I live. So social media, a tool for advocacy and celebrating recovery community. Okay. Sorry, let me figure out how to change the screen here.
So Brian F. wants to know how to come out without violating Tradition 11. Brian S., that is a great question. Faces and Voices actually has an advocacy without anonymity toolkit. I will give you the link to this. We sell them. We give them away. They're everywhere. Tradition 11 is a little bit tricky, but basically the only thing you can't say publicly is that you are a member of AA. Beyond that, you can tell anyone and their mom that you are in recovery, but do not say that you are a member of any 12-step traditions. That is the only thing. Sorry, Shannon. I was just answering the first question.
No, please. I think that's great.
Yeah.
I think that's perfect. And in fact, we can go through these real quick because if you want to, Laszlo, the questions here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll get some of those out of the way if we can answer them right away.
Okay. All right. So, and actually at the end of Tyler, I'm looking at your question now about what you're currently posting. And at the end of my presentation, which will only take about 20 minutes or less, I'd like to open it up for all of us to be able to be on the microphone and share what you're currently doing, what's working, what feedback you've gotten, and what isn't working. So maybe we can have more of a discussion then.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. All right, so let's see. Okay, so I'm just going to give you guys a little bit about my background. I worked in Africa for a couple of years as a journalist for the UN and then moved to New York City and wrote for the United Nations Population Fund there. While I was living in Africa in a country called Sudan, which is next to Egypt, they were in the middle of a civil war and a genocide, and I was finding that the only stories that I could sell to editors were they had to have like a high death toll. There had to be a lot of drama going on in order for agencies even to pick it up. And what I was finding is, that everybody had a hand in this, the news agencies, editors, journalists, politicians, and especially readers. We've become accustomed to seeing either a really strong and gripping visual and wanting to click on the link to see what it is. It's kind of like the idea of a car crash. We all want to slow down and see the blood and guts and gore and see what's going on. And so keep that in mind as we're kind of talking about addiction and recovery and how we want to create a new visual. Okay. All right, so if you guys don't mind typing some responses, I'd love to know what you feel and what you think of when you're looking at these two photos. And then I'm just going to read out your responses. What's the overall feeling or message of a visual like this? David is typing. David says pain. Okay, anybody else? Sadness, empathy, unrest, violence, fear and despair. Thank you so much. Anger, yes. Injustice. Thank you, Renee. And let's take one more. Tyler Hurst is typing. It's not proper representation of the African population, but it does evoke a lot of emotion. Yes, thank you so much. Some words I can think of when I look at this is I feel very helpless and powerless, really. I'm going to go to the next slide, exploitation. Thank you, Ted. Okay. So what about these two photos? What do you think of when you look at these two pictures? Tyler is going to add in his 2 cents. Thank you, Brian. Incongruous label on the baby. Media being used improperly, again, to evoke emotion. Typical negative attitudes about addiction. Yes, thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide. We've got a few more people. So disgust, Renee, and stigma. Exactly. Okay. So the whole purpose of this training and really Faces and Voices mission is to create a discussion and educate the public on how we can do things differently. And so when we start a story with a visual like this, it's all about creating emotional appeal, but the emotions that we're stirring up can literally paralyze people in fear. So what we want to do is create content that empowers the readers to feel that they can act and in turn empower the recovery movement. So as Gandhi, who is one of my heroes, said, journalism, to be useful and serviceable to the country, will take its definite place only when it becomes unselfish and when it devotes its best for the service of the country. And Gandhi is one of my heroes because he took journalism very seriously. He was once the editor of 3 English weeklies, and he really believed that the whole purpose in journalism and writing anything, period, should be of service. Oops. Okay, so I'm going to just give you a couple of a breakdown really quick. When I was in Africa, I was also writing for the UN, but I also found this magazine called Al-Bab, which in Arabic translates into English meaning the door. And it was run by this guy, this Irish man, who said, I'm really tired of the media. All they do is post all this negative stuff that's happening in Sudan, the civil war, the genocide. He said, how do we talk about like the grassroots movement and the people within the community that are trying to make a change, and why can't we highlight them instead? And it was very interesting that my work for Al-Bab was quite different for when I was writing for the UN or for IRA News. And if you can see on the side, the 2 different columns here, they had totally different goals. For Al-Bab, it was to promote positive aspects of life in a war zone. And with the UN, it was really all about the negative sides of it and how things were falling apart constantly. And Al-Bab wanted to focus on celebrating local heroes, local resources, connecting people to community, and promoting community engagement, whereas the UN was all about scolding the leaders and the activities, promoting a political one-sided agenda, and really creating a separation, this idea of the good guy and the bad guy, and building walls instead of bridges. So here's some interesting titles, and I want to you guys to kind of think about this as you're sharing anything on social media. There's so much power just in a title. One title in a magazine for Al-Bab that I wrote was about Sudanese students who were putting on a play to promote unity. There was an Australian doctor there that was providing free fistula surgery for women living in rural areas. And there was a time where we went around Sudan and we were writing about the new restaurants that were opening up by the locals and doing reviews of the food and the atmosphere, and just trying to create like a positive energy with life inside that war zone. And if you look over on the right, you can see the UN. For Iran, the stories were quite different. It was about why South Sudan's children were fighting again, Darfur's deepening conflict, and fewer aid workers attacks. Okay. All right, so here's a news flash for everybody on this call. You are all, okay, I can't even see my screen. You are all reporters for America's recovering community and the national recovery movement. The content we post, share, and link to matters. Social media is a powerful publishing platform, and it has the ability to heal or harm, inspire or destroy, and in a huge way. Here's some hashtags I added in there. Okay. So as individuals in the recovery community and wanting to empower this movement, who is our target audience and what are our goals and our biggest challenges? Okay, so our target audience is really our friends and family and local and the national community. And I would say that our goal is really, there's really only one, or actually I would say two. It's not only to offset the sensational and demeaning portrayals in the mass media of people living with mental illness and caught in addiction's downward spiral that continue to feed the public's morbid fascination, but it's also, and I think most importantly, to infuse hope in our friends, family, and community members that are still struggling. Okay, so first thing I really, Laszlo and I have been trying to help to come up with some hashtags, and I don't know if you guys know what hashtags are. I'm sure you've heard of them, but I think the great thing about hashtags is they are a way to connect us all together. So let's say Tyler or Wendy on this call, or Ted or Brian, decides that he wants to put a short post on there about one of his recovery milestones, and he uses the hashtag recovery movement, which is something Laszlo came up with. Then that way, if I'm using the same hashtag, it's linking our stories together, and it's creating a stronger connection no matter where we are at in the community, which is really, really a beautiful thing. Another hashtag I like to use is not anonymous, and just working at USERRA, one we use often for our peers in recovery and celebrating their stories is our stories have power. And I like this. The recovery book is asking what predominant hashtags we're using in the right now in the movement, and I think that is a great question. I know that on Instagram, the most commonly used addiction recovery hashtags have the word sober in them. So it's hashtag sober, hashtag sober life, and hashtag sober movement, I think. And so what I know Faces and Voices is trying to do is with proper messaging is the idea of, instead of sober or clean and sober, trying to get away from that word and using more of the word recovery. But what I've been doing to connect my posts and USERRA's posts to the bigger movement is using both. So I'll post a photo about my story. I'll do hashtag sober life, hashtag recovery movement, hashtag our stories have power. You can use multiple. You can use up to 30 on Instagram. And Laszlo, do you want to pitch in here on the hashtags that Faces and Voices has made like official for the movement? I'm not sure if Laszlo heard me, but just so in case you guys can hear me okay, I'm hoping everybody can hear me. But so that's the one that they came up with. They're using hashtag recovery movement, so we're trying to get that one branded for everybody. And Faces and Voices has hashtag Faces and Voices with the ampersand sign. And, oh, the call was dropped. We have Laszlo back. Laszlo, I was just wondering, I was letting them know that you wanted to use hashtag recovery movement and hashtag Faces and Voices for the national recovery community. Are there any hashtags I'm missing? Okay, I'm sorry, guys. We might be having some technical difficulties, but everybody else can hear me, it seems, so that's okay. So Tyler's adding that Young People in Recovery has a hashtag YNGPPL recover. I did want to mention that when you're using a hashtag, it's very effective if you look on the slide here, make sure to capitalize the first letter of each word. It makes it easier to see. And again, the most commonly used ones on Instagram are #sober, #soberlife, and a lot of people are using #sober as sexy. So if you're trying to brand your organization, or even let's say you're an individual and you want to just connect to other people in recovery throughout the world, try using those and then adding our new ones, #recovery movement, #notanonymous, and #ourstorieshavepower. #recovery is possible is a good one. I also use #we do recover. Those are also great ways to connect to other people. Okay, so how you can use Facebook, I think, for individuals, the most powerful way is to be open and talk about it. And as Laszlo said, you're not going to break the 11th tradition. I hope I'm saying that right.
Yep.
If you as long as you're not mentioning that you are in a 12-step community or part of that 12-step community, but you can freely say that I am a person in long-term recovery if that's what you choose in order to support others.
And Shannon, can I jump in real quick on that? And the basic concept behind that is that Faces and Voices of Recovery is well aware that people in 12-step communities constitute a large amount of the people that, the sort of greater national consciousness is sort of in their head. They think of 12-step communities as the way that people find recovery, or that they find a resolution to their issues with drugs and alcohol. However, we know as people in recovery that there's a ton of different ways that people deal with their substance use issues. And so, trying to stay away from issues like sober or something like that, or moralizing or something like that, it helps to stay away from the idea that 12-step communities are the only way, because we want to be as inclusive as possible. And that ties into the issue of the 11th step, because what happens is that a lot of people confuse anonymity with secrecy. And just because you are a member of a 12-step program does not mean that you cannot talk about your recovery. You just cannot talk about your recovery at the level of press and say that you are a member of a 12-step program. That is the only thing you can't do. Beyond that, you're allowed to say whatever you want, however you want. That was something that was just put in by the 12-step community very early in their beginning, because they didn't want they didn't want to get a bad rep. This is back in the 30s and 40s when it was really difficult, and there was much, much more stigma than there is today surrounding substance use. So that's just really some of the ways to think about it.
Thank you so much. Yes. So on that note, how can you talk about your personal recovery journey in a way that is empowering other people? And I do it a lot, and sometimes I feel that my whole personal Facebook, my life has become all about recovery, which is a double-edged sword. But in case you, occasionally want to do a post, there's so many. I'm going to take us to USERRA's Facebook page here so we can see some examples, but really it's about celebrating your milestones, giving people an idea of where you once were. Very briefly, I can briefly say, my 5-year my recovery birthday is coming up in a week, and so I want to briefly say, 5 years ago I had crashed my car and ended up in jail with my third DUI, a felony DUI, and here's where I'm at today, and really emphasize all of the things I've been able to overcome. Again, not to focus on the negative side, just give people a very brief idea of where you've been and really who you are today that matters.
And additionally, Shannon, we also have Faces and Voices of Recovery has the recovery messaging training. I'm going to load that up right here because that gives you some really good ways. This is sort of groundbreaking training that came out several years ago. We've been training people on it for years. We're going to redo it this year. We'll be going over it again, but it's really a great way to think about how we are perceived as people in recovery. And these words and these thoughts are not something that just came up out of nowhere. They were tested in focus groups people respond to them in the greater public, because we have to remember that we're not just talking about ourselves. Part of lifting the stigma and opening up about our recovery is being cognizant of the fact that most people in this country, or 5 out of 6 people in this country, have no concept of what it means to have a substance use issue, or they're not in a family, but they can't empathize. And so that's sort of part of the issue.
Yes. Yes, and I was just thinking, what we're going to talk about is some of the challenges, and I think it's important with social media to, there's a lot of people who think, oh, everybody just posts like the positive thing aside of their life, and it's not a real representation of a person's life journey. And I think that that's an important thing to consider when we are talking about recovery, that we're not always posting about the positive sides of a recovery journey. For me personally, lately I've just had a lot of stress and been dealing with, our own the self-loathing that can happen, insecurities, and yesterday I did a post on my page about kind of going through those ups and downs, and I think my hashtag was trust the process, and really being open and candid, especially for the newcomers, to know that a recovery journey is very messy. It's very hard, and we want to make it safe for individuals to be able to experience ups and downs and not have these really hard expectations on them that it's going to be perfect. On my screen here, I have a picture of a friend and also a volunteer at USERRA's recovery community, and he had relapsed. I think it was last year. He was well known in the community. And in Utah, all of the recovery community is connected on our personal Facebook pages. And he felt that it was important to go on his own page and talk about that he had this relapse and that he was getting back up, and he was grateful for the journey and to be able to have the opportunity to get back up. And so just as an example here, I wasn't able to screenshot his own post because I couldn't find it, but we had on our USERRA page done a quick little shout out to him. Most people knew that he had relapsed, and instead of avoiding the topic of relapse on social media, we found a way to talk about it and also celebrate the fact that Jeff had 90 days sober after he had years in sobriety, that we believed in him and we were behind him, and thanks for his example of never giving up. And again, it's taking what is considered to be a harsh, topic, relapse, it's never supposed to happen, and just making it safe for people to have that experience, because most of us do relapse, and it really is okay. Okay, so moving on to the next page, this is something that I'm really passionate about, is the concept of advocating for recovery and using our pages to educate. I think Sober Nation has a wonderful blog where I take stuff from constantly to share on my personal page, on USERRA's page. But what's interesting in the media is you see so much doom and gloom. And I'm going to show you the next slide here. Kind of cut it off here, but so this is one of USERRA's employees came and did an interview, and I don't know if you can see it, but the title of this post that KSL News did was "Heroin-Related Overdose Deaths Quadruple." And instead of a picture of our employee here, Becca, it was a picture of a needle, kind of like in the previous screen that I had shared with you guys. And for me, I don't know if I'm overly sensitive from working in a war zone and working closely with the Sudanese, seeing how these news the way they were angling the news was really wearing on it was terrifying their communities. They're like, oh no, we're in war again. I thought we had peace. And it's the same concept, that if we share articles that are leading with doom and gloom, we will paralyze our community. It does matter. We have to make sure that, yes, we want to educate the public about heroin-related deaths, But is there a different way to spin it? Is there a positive note to lead with, and having that piece in there that they are quadrupling, because that is important to information. So just consider that when you're sharing this. Okay, I'm just reading over the comments, make sure I'm not missing anybody.
I think Wendy Gore Hickman had how to get everyone in the recovery community on one page or site. I think, Wendy, that's a tough question because not everyone is going to be on the same page. You mean even in, your friends and family, there's huge differences in opinion. But, all we can do, Faces and Voices of Recovery, and all we can do as recovery advocates, people who choose to speak openly about our issues with substance use, is try to use the least damaging words and language as possible. I think that it's one of those things where you have to really try to find the articles that promote pathways to recovery, articles that promote people that are in recovery, articles that aren't just, like Shannon said, doom and gloom, articles that use good language, that stay away from the words like junkie and, like drunk, words that have power and that are damaging. And so really choosing how you use your language and not thinking about forcing other people to get on the same page, but rather leading by example and using the language that is powerful and that paints a good portrait of people in recovery, and demonstrating that. And through that example of being concise and clear, we'll be able to bring people coalesce around the image that, really is more accurate. That's all I have to say about that.
Hey, so Laszlo, it looks like Barbara had a statement, and I'm not sure, I'm sure what she's referring to, but she says that it's true, but in her opinion, IMHO should not fight with each other. Disagree. Sure. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that statement, Barbara. What were you disagreeing with exactly?
Oh, I'll let Barbara type her answer.
Okay, I'm not sure what MAT, Medicaid. Okay, well,
medication-assisted treatment.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what to say about medication-assisted treatment. It's a great way that people often find recovery through it. We promote it. Everyone should. There's, not one thing works for everybody. I see. Yeah. Barbara, you are absolutely correct. Like there's just different ways of approaching it, and we have to respect everyone's way of approaching it and just continue to do our way is the number one thing you can do, and try to work together cordially and try to use all the same language. I think is the best way.
Yeah, and I think that with Faces and Voices being this national organization that is really trying to mobilize recovery community, they have done so much research and training on proper messaging and this idea of multiple pathways. And to be honest, I've had quite a lot of, in fact, I have a blog coming out on Sober Nation today or tomorrow about my own recovery journey, because I didn't do the traditional 12-step or treatment approach. And because when I found the recovery community after 2 years in recovery, I had so much judgment. I had done a training in Connecticut under an RCO over there, and people were just saying to me in this professional setting that your addiction wasn't that bad. 12 steps is the only way, and it was, it was a training on multiple paths. So we have a lot of judgment and stigma within our own community, and we have to make space for one another. That's the whole purpose of this movement, is to stop putting people in boxes. Whatever was in your box works for you, but we've got to make space for others.
Right. Have any of you, can you guys type in maybe about some of your challenges that you've encountered when you're talking publicly, at least on social media or with your friends and family, about discussing your recovery, any misconceptions, we'd like to address some of those, and maybe some of those issues have come up in Face and Voices, and we've got some good guidelines for you. And just I'd like to hear some more of your experiences. Type into the chat. Shannon, you can keep doing what you're doing, and we'll get to some of those once people have put in their answers.
Okay. I think I only have a few slides left. And I just wanted, I think probably most of these are common sense, but what I try to do is I know that I have created sort of a public platform here in Utah that people know that I'm in recovery because I talk about it so much. And so I've started to use my personal page as a way to really support people, a way to really talk about hard issues in an empowering way. And sometimes just a simple quote and using a hashtag, we can recover. I love the hashtag recovery movement because it helps people to understand that they're part of a larger community and that there's this really awesome advocacy movement happening. And so another thing that I try to do on my own personal page is really educate about community resources. I was at an appointment yesterday. I was sitting in the lobby. I opened up our Health Fitness magazine, and I saw that Fit to Recover, which is the first and only sober gym in Utah, had their first article in there and talking about recovery and what they're doing in the movement to promote the sober gym. And I did a post on my personal page saying how proud I was, did you know this service is out there, and being able to link to the article. And then, now I think we can just open it up to everybody to kind of hear your feedback. Let's see.
I will say a couple things in relation to some questions people asked earlier. One thing about language, I think part of the reason additionally they don't use the word sober or some of the reason they came around the word recovery is because we're trying to treat addiction and substance use issues as issues of chronic health rather than acute health problem where you overdose and you go to treatment. That's an acute health problem. That's a crisis management rather than a chronic health issue like diabetes or something. And so when you're dealing with things in a chronic health issue way, you have to think about like alternative pathways, and so medication-assisted treatment is one of that, like checking with your doctor, making it a much more clinical health setting. And so when you use the word sober or something along those lines, sobriety, one thing that comes to mind is abstinence. And abstinence only in terms of recovery is very popular and it works for a lot of people. I practice abstinence. However, that doesn't apply if you're using a medication-assisted treatment. So that's just something to think about in terms of language, and that's one of the nuances of language and how we choose to use it. And then secondly, when we're using articles or things like that, you can edit the articles that come up on Facebook when you link to them. There's a way to do that. You just click on it after it posts up. And one thing I found that's really useful to get people to care is to read the article fully and pull out a nice quote that's inspiring about what you really think the essence of the article is. And that's a great way to get people in your circle to read the article, because that's going to be a lot more powerful of a draw for them rather than just, hey, read this. Show them why it's important. Show them the central thesis of the article. Read the article, understand it so that you can share it. It's much more likely to be commented on and shared, and then engaging in the dialogue with the wider world rather than just your issue of saying, this is my stuff. You want to say, this is my stuff. This is why you should care about it. Let's talk about it.
Yes, and I just wanted to add, Tyler is putting in some interesting experiences that I can relate to. Tyler's not a part of the 12-step community, and there is a lot of, in fact, there's a great article I found online. I'm not sure how to upload it. I'll try to upload it to this thing, but it was by William White about multiple pathways and this idea of celebration and tolerance of others' pathways. And it specifically talks about the 12-step community and how, there's I can't remember the phrase he used, but it was almost cult-like. and not to put the 12-step community down, but that there are other paths that are supporting people. And what we need to do, I don't know if you guys have seen The Anonymous People. It's free on Netflix right now. But it talks about how the whole 12-step community is the whole reason why the National Recovery Movement even exists today. Without that service and that support, we wouldn't. That's what we're trying to build off of, what the 12-step community has created for us. And so,
Right.
but a lot of that, the 12-step community has been about anonymity. And really, as long as you're not talking about those that you sponsor, or again, as Laszlo said, saying that you're part of a 12-step community, you're not breaking tradition at all. And the only way that we empower the movement is to talk about it. And the one thing I did want to say is bringing up this idea of abstinence. Tyler's saying, what about people who identify as being in recovery but they drink alcohol? I went to a training at the CCAR, which is a recovery community organization in Connecticut, and they're very big on sort of educating the community about multiple paths and how that's supposed to work and how we can be supportive. And while we were there, we had a gentleman order a glass of wine at our group dinner. And everybody was shocked. Everybody was talking crap about this guy. Oh my gosh, we're at a recovery event and he's ordering wine. And the next day he got up in front of the training and said, I would like to have a conversation about this. My addiction was to methamphetamines. I've never had a problem with alcohol. This is my recovery journey. It's not yours. Please don't judge me for it. And it was a great learning opportunity for all of us, is that we really just don't know, and it is not our place to judge.
Well, and Shannon, to piggyback on that, to talk about issues of only abstinence, that gets to the very heart of the matter, because the way that you get 23 million Americans in recovery is not just saying, hey, did you have a full-blown problem to drugs and alcohol? If you break it down like that, you're going to get a very small number. But if you open it up to say, hey, did you have a problem with this at some point, and do you not have a problem anymore, that opens it up to a lot more people, because I have known many people in my life who have had issues with heroin, and they were able to put it down. They've never touched it again, but they still drink. They still go out in the world, and they maybe define themselves as in recovery, or they don't define themselves in recovery. But that's their choice to make. And so when you're thinking about it like that, you have to be super cognizant to not judge people, because, like Shannon said, you never know.
And if, you know, on a personal level, if I could just be a regular person and have a drink and not get all crazy and end up in jail, I wish I could be that person, you know. And so if somebody can and their life is stable, then really, I mean, that's recovery, right? So does anybody want to add anything else in, or?
I think one thing that's important as well is, like, when you're on social media, you know, really try to stay away from denigrating other people, denigrating any, like, things, coming off negative or going on rants about anything without having, like, really informed, you know, solid positions, because the second you start going on rants, people start tuning out. And I know that as a social media manager for Faces and Voices page, Instagram, all that kind of stuff, I deal with, you know, I post to 20,000 people on average. And I know that when people start coming off as really negative and being very hard and inflexible in their statements, that does not do the movement justice, because the way you have to think about it is how I think about it every day. Like, I am a messenger for recovery, and how I carry myself is how people will view other people who have substance use issues. And so you have to be super cognizant of that at all times, because, you know, in potential employers' minds and people's minds, you're one drink away from ruining your life or being an idiot or whatever, you know, like, you're always suspect at that point. And so you have to say, no, I'm not. I'm in recovery, or I've recovered from my problem, and I have value to society. And that's the message that Faces and Voices of Recovery is trying to say, is that we deserve this. And that's how you have to present yourself in social media. And that's how you have to be, is informed and interesting and cognizant of the world around you.
Love it.
All right.
I like what David said. He says the problem with that is that no one knows if they're going to go crazy and end up in jail until it happens. So that one drink is taking an unnecessary risk. And David, I think that's such a good point, is that especially with young people, because I spoke at a training or just an event for graduates who were teenagers and had been court ordered, to go through this treatment. Anyways, that was the idea, is that really they're so young, they don't know if they have an addiction. They just know that they got busted with pot. And but that, I don't know, I would say probably the majority of the world drinks without it being a huge issue. And do you think that that's right, Laszlo, that most people can drink without a problem and that it is part of our culture?
It's a really tough question to say because, the numbers are still out, essentially. And here's the other thing about addiction, and I learned this at a medication-assisted treatment meeting I went to when we were talking about medication-assisted treatment, is that, certain people respond to certain things in the same way. And so it's definitely a fact that genetics has a huge role to play in someone's ability to become addicted to a substance. That is without a doubt a fact. For me, that form took drinking. But however, this is something I did not know, and this is something that I think about every day, is that certain people respond to certain drugs or substances because of the way that their chemical makeup is. And so someone can do heroin or try an opioid once and not like it at all, and then they're fine, but maybe their brain takes to their receptors, pick up whatever cocaine gives you. That's the difference. But someone can pick up an opioid once and they can function just fine on it, and that means that they might have a problem with opioids. And so that works for a lot of people. So for instance, like we were talking earlier, someone can try something once and not have an issue, but to the next person, it could be something completely different. So that's just something to think about in terms of recovery and people's recovery. It's just, it kind of really comes down to the fact that it is different for everybody. And you have to be always cognizant of that.
I love it. Does anybody want to make a statement that hasn't contributed? Alan, thank you for your statement. It says, I look at it as who I am to judge how anybody else does their recovery. I have a hard enough time with my own even after 30 years. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that that's an important thing. I mean, life period is hard, and then and I think our recovery community can, has a lot of its own challenges with codependency and just trying to find our own worth, and we've destroyed our lives so much, and so there's a lot. The issues can be compounded. So, cheers to you.
Yeah, definitely. I think that if no one else has any questions, I want to close out with just a couple of things. There's a feedback survey in the bottom left. There's a Face and Voice of Recovery link. You can find Shannon Egan on USARA. I also put a couple links to the Advocacy with Anonymity PDF, so you can click that and go and learn more about how to be a recovery advocate without violating any 12-step traditions or any 12-step fellowships that you may be a part of. I would also say that you should check out the recovery messaging training link. There's a PDF for that. That's super important. Keep an eye out in the future for Faces and Voices to update that. That will be a new thing coming out this year. And then additionally, we're looking at the Recovery Voices count for our next presentation. I will be giving that presentation. Please, if you have any more questions, contact me at info@facesandvoicesofrecovery.org. Shannon, do you want to give out your email in case anyone has questions for you? Oh, she might have signed off. Beyond that, please contact us if you have any questions. We are here to help. We are here to organize the recovery community. And please, the Recovery Book at Gmail has a How to Clean Up Your Online Reputation. Please check that out. Please send us any questions you have. So thank you for coming to this meeting. I'm going to disconnect in a couple minutes. And if you have any questions, please, once again, contact us. Thank you very much. Goodbye.